Gollum, one of the most compelling characters in all of fiction and fantasy. Originally created by J.R.R. Tolkien, Gollum, or otherwise known as Smeagol, as his original counterpart, first made his appearance in Tolkien's very successful story, The Hobbit. He was created to be not as cruel as a goblin or orc, but also not as kind or humble as a regular hobbit. Gollum was meant to be a wild card, thrown into this vast melting pot of fantasy characters in Middle-earth. Tolkien's world feels tangible and real because of the history he has poured into each and every single one of his characters, whether it's location, character, or era, and Smeagol might be one of the best examples of this. He was essentially a nobody before he got entangled with the great story of the One Ring. Gollum, or Smeagol as he was once called, was originally a store hobbit, which was specifically one of the 3 hobbit races in Middle-earth. Smeagol was a part of a tribe of the hobbits that were known for their skill with being on the water, navigating rivers and great lakes, and took to their own clan very personally. One day as Smeagol was fishing with his cousin Deagle encountered the One Ring inside the waters of the Gladden River and took it for himself. When Smeagol caught up with his cousin later on, his eyes caught sight of the One Ring immediately and let himself be taken by its influence. Smeagol strangled his cousin to death and kept the ring for his own for 500 years. Everything I have just described has all been shown through the film adaptation of The Return of the King, the third parter in the overall series of Lord of the Rings. Throughout the books and the movies, Gollum serves as a symbol of the corrupting influence of power and destructive nature of greed. But I want to take the time to analyze the main conflict Gollum struggles with after he joins Frodo and Sam. He is caught in the moral dilemma of doing the right thing by helping the hobbits make their way to Mordor, or killing them and taking their ring for himself. At the end of the story, the evil side of Gollum takes control of his will and tries to kill Frodo and Sam, and achieves his goal temporarily by taking the One Ring. But in the end, he eventually gets foiled by Frodo and pushes Gollum off the edge of Mount Doom, leading to his eternal fate, dying with his precious in his hands as he gets swallowed up by the lava. Lots of people who witness Gollum's story play out tend to think that Smeagol was the victim throughout the whole story, that Smeagol was the one trying to do the right thing in the end. And because he tried his hardest to be good, it's not his fault that the Gollum side took over. And while that's somewhat true, I think lots of viewers misunderstand what Gollum's arc really was. Yes, there was definitely a sweeter side of this character that tries to do good for a short while. But here's something that many people miss out in the screenplay. The cute and sweet side of the character, that being Smeagol, that everyone has pity for, is the exact same person that decides to betray Frodo and Sam at the end of the Two Towers. Now, I know that many people will comment the fact that Smeagol thought that Frodo betrayed him first, even though it was a misunderstanding in reality. But what is really fascinating is that in the scene before this, we see Sam make it very clear to Smeagol that the whole situation with the Forbidden Pool was not at all meant to be a backstabbing from Frodo. He explains that everything was out of his control, and that Frodo would never do anything to hurt Smeagol. And even though Smeagol says in this moment that he understands and has no hard feelings, Gollum comes back again and convinces Smeagol that the hobbits really are treacherous. And it didn't take much to persuade him. Smeagol immediately decides to start planning on how he can kill the hobbits. I think this is the ultimate argument to show that for how sweet and nice Smeagol wanted to be in those moments, he was the one who decided he cared more for the ring than the hobbits. That wasn't Gollum's choice. That was clearly Smeagol's decision. Sure, Gollum gave some good convincing and nudges to do so, but the reality is that Smeagol is the one responsible. This scenario is very true to how people act in the everyday life when they are tempted to do something they shouldn't do, but yet their sinful hearts end up choosing evil. The One Ring is a clear allegory that represents every kind of sin that humanity loves to indulge in. And it is also everything that is wrong with mankind. And there is unfortunately great evil that gives power to do that kind of will, if we set our minds to that. And the ring is a physical and practical example of how it destroys lives. And unfortunately, because it has power, some will choose different scenarios of how they like to use that power. Some will want to keep it as their own, for simple pleasures in life. Some will full on lust after it, and dive into all its small and short-term benefits. And some would even try to use it for good, but eventually be taken by the power it provides. Gollum is the essential example of how the ring takes over one's mind and body. And like I said, I think audiences who have watched these movies always have it pretty mixed up when they try to understand who the character of Gollum really is. People seem to be very quick to point out that Smeagol was a victim of the ring's power, and he had no control over his demise. But that couldn't be any further from the truth. When we see the flashback in Return of the King, we see Deagle and Smeagol being normal hobbit folk, fishing in a nice peaceful river enjoying fellowship together. But it's only when Deagle snags the ring out of the riverbed that Smeagol sees the ring and immediately grows jealous. Now that I think about it, there is very much a Cain and Abel kind of analogy to that. There was no Gollum personality inside Smeagol to persuade anything. These wants and desires were purely conjured up in Smeagol's mind. He burned with lust and greed for it as soon as he sees it in Deagle's hands. And it really wasn't long until after his actions lined perfectly up with his desires by killing his cousin and taking it as his own. And you know what the interesting thing is? Even if the Gollum personality was instantly spawned inside Smeagol the moment he caught eyes on the ring, it would have been still Smeagol's actions that kills Deagle. Because anything that one personality does, the other has to also go through. It's not in the same sense where someone like the Winter Soldier, for example, is literally brainwashed to think or act a certain way. All of Gollum's actions are accounted for as much as Smeagol's actions are. We see this play out through all of Gollum's interactions, whether he is playing riddles in the dark with Bilbo or scheming to kill Frodo and Sam. My point in saying all of this is Smeagol is just as guilty as Gollum is, despite of how sweet and nice Smeagol can be sometimes. Sometimes in the real life, we like to think of ourselves in the same way. If you get in trouble with the authorities, for example, then you have to explain yourself in the court of law. The first thing we tend to do if we are guilty is put the blame on someone else. In fact, Gollum does the exact same thing when he's confronted by Frodo after Shelob's cave. We always want to say, it was my upbringing that made me into the person I am today, or it wasn't my fault. I was just a product of the world around me. And while yes, this is true to an extent, we have to realize that we all are responsible for our own actions. And it's very clear to see that Gollum is no exception to this. No matter how nice and sweet Smeagol came off as, he still did his evil deeds, and he even confessed as much to Frodo at the end when they meet at Mount Doom. This should be the nail in the coffin for everyone to realize that the tragedy of Gollum wasn't a big evil mean entity taking over a sweet and innocent mind. It was the fact the sweet and innocent mind willingly decided to commit despicable and evil deeds out of its own greed and jealousy inside from its own heart, which in the end never made the sweet and innocent side of Gollum actually innocent. He, like everyone else in our real world, deal with the fact that we are all actually sinful beings from the heart. Not that it was our surroundings or other influences that made us into the people we become, and while yes, that is a contributing factor to a lot of things, we are ultimately responsible for our own decisions. One day we will have to stand before a righteous and purely good God who has every right to judge us on our own actions. The question is, are you saved by the Savior's blood, who rescued us from our own sin? Or are you like Gollum, who never actually changed and gripped your sin tightly until your death? In Gollum's case, this is what creates your very own downfall, holding onto your addictions, your obsessions, and all the desires from the flesh. That is what buried Gollum underneath those flames of Mount Doom. This is why I think Gollum/Smeagol is one of the most fascinating characters of all time. Not just because of the incredible performance from Andy Serkis, or the revolutionary technology that brought this creature to life, but how the character's philosophical and moral struggle mirrors our own desires from the flesh. Because truth be told, there's a bit of Gollum in every one of us, whether we realize it or not, and it's only through Jesus Christ that we can be set free from that hold of sin forever.